Donald Trump called him a lowlife on national television. "What a lowlife," he repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. And Stephen Colbert heard every word, walked onto his stage the very next night, and did the one thing Trump has never been able to stop. He told the truth, not a joke, not a punchline. The truth, and it hit harder than anything comedy could have manufactured. This is the story of how a late-night host found the two words that no lawyer, no spin team, and no amount of presidential rage could ever take back. For years, the relationship between Stephen Colbert and Donald Trump followed a familiar pattern. Colbert was sharp, relentless, and genuinely funny. Trump was dismissive, contemptuous, and certain that the CBS host was exactly what he called him: a lowlife with low ratings doing low things for a shrinking audience that already agreed with him. The dynamic was predictable enough that both sides knew their roles. Colbert threw the punches. Trump absorbed them, redirected them, and used them as fuel. The audience laughed. The clips circulated. The next night, reset everything, and the cycle began again. Laughter is like that. It releases tension, but does not resolve it. It names something without pinning it down. A perfectly crafted joke about a politician's behavior gives the audience permission to feel what they already feel, but it does not change the underlying reality that produced the feeling. The subject of the joke goes home, sleeps comfortably, and wakes up the next morning unchanged. This is the structural limitation of political comedy that even its most skilled practitioners quietly understand. The jokes land, but they do not stick. They fade by morning. The scoreboard resets at midnight. What Colbert understood, in a way that most people in his profession never fully articulate, is that the only thing that does not fade is a fact. The shift began before the verdict, gradually, almost quietly, as the legal architecture surrounding Trump took shape. The indictments started arriving, the charges accumulated, the courtroom appearances began generating their own news cycles, distinct from the political ones. And Colbert made a deliberate choice that, in retrospect, looks like the most strategically intelligent decision of his entire late-night career. He changed the title, not suddenly and not with fanfare. He simply started calling Trump what the legal system was calling him: Defendant Trump, not former President Trump, not Donald Trump. Defendant Trump. The first time he said it with that specific rhythm, the audience's reaction was noticeably different from the standard comedy response. It was not the release of a punchline landing. It was something closer to recognition, the sound a room makes when something that has been true for a while is finally named accurately in a public setting. Defendant is a legal designation. It is the word a court uses for a person formally facing charges. Donald Trump, at that moment, was a defendant. Calling him that was not editorial opinion. It was the most precise available description of his legal status. Colbert kept saying it. Night after night, the phrase reappeared with the regularity of a running segment. Defendant Trump appeared in court. Defendant Trump's attorneys filed motions. Defendant Trump's legal team argued. He turned it into a rhythm, the kind that audiences begin to anticipate and lean toward, the kind that signals continuity and consequence rather than the one-night entertainment of a single sharp joke. The audience learned the phrase. They started expecting it. The expectation itself became part of the experience. But that was only preparation for what came next. May 2024, Manhattan. 12 members of a jury who had spent 11 hours reviewing evidence reached a unanimous conclusion on 34 separate counts. Guilty, every single one. The judge set a sentencing date. The machinery of the criminal justice system moved forward with the procedural efficiency it maintains regardless of who the defendant is. And for the first time in American history, a former president of the United States had been convicted of felony crimes by a jury of his peers. Colbert walked onto the stage that night knowing exactly what he had. He did not rush it. He did not arrive with the breathless energy of a person handed unexpected material and still processing how to use it. He came out with the particular quality of someone who has been waiting for a specific moment and understands precisely what it requires. He looked out at the audience. He let the setup breathe. And then he said the two words that the Manhattan jury had just made permanently and inarguably true. Convicted felon. What followed was not applause in the way that comedy applause works. It was an explosion. People on their feet, voices raised, the noise building past the point where reactions normally begin to subside and continuing for nearly a full minute while Colbert stood at the front of the stage and simply let it happen. He did not redirect it. He did not shape it or manage it or try to move the show forward through it. He understood that what was occurring in that room was not a response to his performance. It was a response to history. He was simply the person standing standing in the room when it arrived. What made those two words so devastating had nothing to do with comedic craft. Colbert is exceptionally skilled at his craft and he knows it, but skill was not the instrument that night. The instrument was accuracy. Convicted felon is not a nickname generated in a writer's room. It is not a characterization shaped by political preference. It is not the kind of label that a political opponent attaches to someone they dislike and that supporters can dismiss as motivated distortion. It is a legal designation applied by 12 people who had no prior political relationship with the defendant, who had spent 11 hours reviewing evidence, and who had reached a unanimous conclusion on every single count before them. The designation exists because a formal legal process produced it. It cannot be fact-checked into uncertainty. It cannot be reframed as perspective. It sits in the public record with the permanence of things that are simply true. That is why critics struggle with it in a way they do not struggle with jokes. A joke can be argued with. The premise can be called flawed. The comparison can be called unfair. The comedic logic can be called strained. There is always a door open for counter-argument when the territory is opinion, but convicted felon does not live in opinion territory. It lives in the territory of what happened, and what happened is documented, public and final. The phrase became a ritual. After that night, whenever Colbert approached those two words in his monologue, the audience began responding before he finished saying them. The anticipation built the way it builds when a crowd recognizes the opening notes of a song they have heard hundreds of times. The recognition arrived before the thing itself did, and the gap between recognition and arrival created its own pleasure. Colbert would pause. The room would lean forward. When the words came, the explosion followed, shaped by the expectation that had been building for however many seconds the setup required. This is different from what comedy usually does to an audience. Comedy requires the performer to construct the experience. The setup creates expectation. The punchline subverts it in a specific way that produces release. The audience's role is reactive. They receive what the comedian has built. But in this case, the audience had internalized the fact itself. They were not responding to a comic construction. They were responding to a reality that had become part of their shared experience with the show, a reality that grew more powerful rather than less with repetition because its foundational accuracy never diminished. Each repetition was a reminder. Each reminder landed with the weight of something that cannot be undone. The former president of the United States is a convicted felon. Say it once and it is news. Say it twice and it is a fact being confirmed. Say it every night for weeks and months and it becomes something that operates differently in the culture, a phrase integrated into the language of how millions of people understand a particular person and a particular historical moment. Colbert understood that putting those two words into nightly rotation, in front of millions of viewers who would share the clips and repeat the phrase in their own conversations, was doing something that went beyond entertainment. It was building a historical record in real time. Trump's response was characteristically focused on the process rather than the outcome. The case was politically motivated. The charges were unprecedented applications of law. The prosecution was a weaponization of the justice system against a political opponent. Those arguments continue to circulate in various forums and continue to find audiences among people already inclined to receive them. But they are arguments about how the verdict was reached, not about whether it was reached. The outcome is what it is. 34 guilty verdicts are 34 guilty verdicts, regardless of what anyone believes about the motivations of the people who brought the case. Colbert does not have to engage with the process arguments. He just has to say the phrase that the process produced. And when Trump called him a lowlife for doing it, Colbert did what he always does. He walked onto the stage, looked at the audience, let the pause build for exactly the right number of seconds, and said it again. Convicted felon. The audience erupted on cue, because Trump calling Colbert a lowlife is opinion. It can be dismissed, debated, counter-argued, and forgotten by morning. But the phrase Colbert says back has a quality that Trump's insult will never have. It is already complete. It is already final. It is already carved into the public record by a jury of 12 people in a Manhattan courtroom who spent 11 hours making sure they got it right. And no amount of presidential contempt, however loudly expressed, however repeatedly delivered, can change a single word of it.